Old school automotive back again today, guys. We're looking at the 1966 Ford Mustang, and I wanted to make a little bit of a tutorial video here, and this is more or less based for somebody, let's say that you've always wanted a classic car and you found a really good deal on one. If that was the case, most likely that classic car excuse me, has probably been sitting around in somebody's garage, or worse yet, outside or something like that. And probably it hasn't run for quite a while and probably hasn't been on the road for even longer. But you buy the car and you get it home, and your uncle or your cousin or something like that shows up and says they can help you get this thing started. They worked on these back in the 70s and the 80s. And they show up and you get her going, you get some new fuel in it. It'll start, it'll idle semi-decently. Give it a little bit of gas, it'll move down the road okay, but any sort of real throttle, and it just doesn't want to go anywhere really. And then you come to a stop and you turn it off, go in the store for a few minutes, come back out, go to start it up, it just doesn't want to start. When it finally starts, it belches a bunch of smoke out the exhaust pipes. And so at that point, you're looking at probably carburetor problems. And the root of those carburetor problems on cars of that nature that have sat for quite a while is the fuel being left in them in general, but also the modern fuel that we have. It's really, really rough on carburetors. And when it sits in there and evaporates, there's 10% ethanol in it, and it actually attracts moisture. And so you wind up with some really nasty, sludgy stuff inside your carburetor. Most of the time, at least some of the jets, if it's a 4-barrel, or one of the jets, if it's 2 barrels, is going to be partially plugged up. The idle circuit's going to be all gummed up, and it's just not going to run right. And so what you're going to need to do is A, rebuild the carburetor, B, clean and rebuild the carburetor, or C, just replace the carburetor. And in any of those instances, the very first thing you're going to need to do is remove it from the vehicle. It's to properly clean it, and especially to rebuild or replace it, obviously it's got to be removed from the vehicle. If you've never been around something like this, you grew up, maybe you've tinkered with your own stuff since you were younger, but most likely everything's probably been fuel injected. And so you're looking at this and you're thinking, boy, I really have no idea what to do. If there was a fuel problem in my fuel injected vehicle and I had to pull the intake and the fuel rails and all the injectors, I might just have to throw in the towel and bring it into a shop. Well, hopefully this video will illustrate just how much more simple doing something with a carburetor, whether it be rebuilding, removing, replacing, cleaning, whatever, is than a fuel injected system. All right, so to start off with, we only need just a couple tools here. I got sitting right here some dikes, which I don't think you'll even see me use, teeny tiny needle nose, a 1/2-inch wrench, and a flathead screwdriver. You may need more tools than this, especially if you're working on a vehicle that was produced in the late 70s or 80s. There's going to be more things to take off. There could be hard lines that have nuts on them, so you may need different size wrenches. There may be other ways of connecting the throttle to the carburetor, which you may need a different tool to get off, but probably not. But this is just for this particular carburetor, but almost all carburetors are pretty well attached to the engine and all the other stuff in the same way. There may just be more, like especially vacuum lines when you get up in the 70s and 80s. This is 66, so it's pretty simple. I only have the 2 vacuum lines up front. But let's get started here. So the very first thing we need to do is pull the air cleaner so we can get a much better look at our carburetor itself. Make sure not to lose that nut off the top here. And now that we can see everything that's going on the top of the carburetor, let's just take a quick look around and we'll look at the things that are connected to it. So this is all the stuff that's going to need to come off of this in order for me to pick it up by this thing and walk right off with it. That's a little loose. I'm going to tighten that. So we can see we have the throttle linkage here. We have a vacuum line right here and one underneath it right there. We have the connection to run the electric choke. We have the fuel line, and we have 4 nuts on these studs. Mine are 1/2 inch. I've seen them be 9/16, 7/16 sometimes, but for the most part, they're going to be 1/2 inch. But just check your size. Make sure you don't mess up your hardware. So to get started, I like to do the easiest things first. All right. So the very easiest things are going to be your vacuum lines. That's super easy to pull off. Hopefully I say that. No, I'm not going to be able to get it off. Watch. Oh, she's coming. Here we go. That one's off. That one's off. Unplug the electrical connection for the electric choke. And then over here on this side, we have the throttle linkage. I'm not going to lie to you guys. I pulled the pin on this just before I started recording because it can kind of be a pain. Mine's held in there by a little cotter pin. But I pulled it and just stuck it back in there lightly. Now, I always like to mess with this throttle linkage before disconnecting the return springs. Notice there's 2 here. Otherwise, your throttle is going to be flopping all around, and your accelerator pump right here is going to be throwing fuel down the snoot of the intake there, which is probably not something that you want to do a whole bunch of, especially if it's just going to be sitting in there, because once again, new fuel we do not like. So one side note here, you may have a cable that like pops onto a little ball that you just press on and pry off. It'll probably only have 1 return spring if you have that. The reason for these 2 return springs on the system with this rod like this is that it reduces the wear inside. See the little play right there? There, you can see it there. Yeah, it'll reduce the wear. If you only have a return spring like on the backside, it'll wear one side of the inside of that little hole that just came out of. Anyway, just a side note. So we got the rod off. We shall take that back spring off, make sure it doesn't go flying. Take that spring off. All right, so we got everything off rather than the bolts and the fuel line. So disconnect fuel line, just a flathead screwdriver. See if I can do this left-handed. Probably not. Just want to make sure we get this clamp loose enough to where it'll go over that barb. I don't know if you can see that little bulge. She's pretty loose here. Let's see if it'll slide over it. No, not quite yet. Yep, there we go. Okay. Now this fuel line here can be quite a bear to get off. And chances are, if you are working on a vehicle that doesn't get worked on as much as this one, it's going to really be difficult to get off. Anyway, I'm going to set this down for just a second, so pardon the camera weirdness, and pull this off with my right hand. I'll bring you guys right back when the fuel line is off. Alrighty, there we go. I got her off. So now we have everything that's connecting the carburetor to anything except for the intake. And for that, we just need to take off these 4 nuts, or bolts. If someone put it on with bolts, which they shouldn't have, it should be studded with nuts. But so there's one, there's two, and both these should be finger tight. I thought that other one was. I'm going to unscrew this one all the way. There is a washer underneath it. We'll set it right over here with our tools. We don't want to lose these washers. We especially don't want these washers to fall down the intake or anything else to fall down the intake. Another little side note here, guys. I have heard horror stories in the past where a guy dropped a little nut or a washer down the carburetor or the intake and thought to himself, oh, that thing's heavy. There's no way that's going to get sucked into the engine. Fired that engine up, and about 5 seconds later, start hearing a very pronounced knocking sound. Do not start an engine if something falls down in the intake, guys. All right, so coming to the back here, I don't know if we can see there. You can see that nut right there. If I can get on it here. Boy, that's awkward looking in the camera. There we go. So like I said, I wanted to do this all live, guys, so you can just see just how quickly, how short of a time it takes to get a carburetor off, especially when you're familiar with it. I do have to say it's going to take you a little longer. You're going to have a little trial and error on your first go. Excuse my hand in the way there. I'm trying to get this washer. There we go. One more on this side. Let's see. Yeah. Don't lose anything, like I said. We don't want to fish stuff. Boy, I'm not going to lie, guys. I've never worked like this before, watching myself in the camera. It's a little bit interesting. Oh, get rid of that. Little experience tip right there. Sometimes too much stuff in your hands is going to inhibit your abilities. All right. So, everything should be loose now. This carburetor has been removed many times and rather recently, so it's probably going to just lift right off. If you're working on a vehicle, as the one I explained at the beginning of the vehicle or the video here, it probably will be stuck. Oftentimes, if you grab a hold of it real good like this and just pull, you'll hear it pop loose. Other times, that's not quite enough. I just want to advise you, probably try not to pry around in parts down here if there's any way to avoid it or any other way. You can try lightly tapping it. I would start with a rubber mallet, but be real light. The metal that these are made out of is not the best quality. Nothing against Edelbrock, but it's all carburetors for the most part. But usually you can get them off. What you'll see underneath, I'm going to go ahead and pick this one up, is I got a dual plenum, and it looks like my gasket stayed on the bottom of the carburetor here. So we're just going to want to excuse the camera here, take that gasket off. So I got the gasket here now. We'll just put it back down. I have the carburetor sitting there. Do not do that, probably. Do not drop one of these. It will be the end of it, all right? So that's how long it took. I mean, the whole video we're going on 15 minutes here. I blabbed a whole bunch at the beginning, so, take that into account. But You know, you can get one of these off in 10 minutes if you're familiar with what you're doing. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, comment, share this video. Ask me questions if you need. Have a good day.